So I'm a legal aid lawyer. When I was in law school, I was at Harrison Housing, Community, and Economic Development Clinic at Georgetown, and I really made me passionate about community lawyering and using lawyering in different ways than just representing people in court. And when I left Georgetown, I just looked all over the country for a place to do that. And I started with Advocates for Basic Legal Equality in Toledo, which is a non-LLC funded organization. And really got an opportunity to do a lot of that stuff. Got to do a lot of policy advocacy, got some laws passed, did some group representation, got some great decisions. But I just started realizing that the law I got passed just wasn't enforced, just ignored by the judge. The good precedent I got might as well not have been there because it didn't matter in court. And then I moved to our hotline. So now I give advice to people who are going into eviction court by themselves, and I sit in a not this big of a call center, but an open office with all our intake specialists. And if you can think about, your frustration with open offices, if you've ever been in one, just imagine if what you heard all day was people being denied the legal help they need. I'm sorry, we think your problem is important, but we don't have the staff or resources to help you. Just hearing that all day. So that made me think a lot about what's wrong with our law. And I think the problem is we're focusing too much on one aspect of the law, making decisions. That's the first thing you think about law. Where someone's got to make a decision sometimes when people have disputes. So one common dispute that I deal with is should a tenant be evicted, request the landlord. One way to make decisions is you could just flip a coin, or a trial by combat. Who has the bigger army? But we moved to just having a person make that decision. We call a judge, a magistrate. And I was happy that I was going after lunch. If you know that study from Israel about why judges make decisions, that they gave in bail, I think it was sentencing hearings, they gave much bigger sentences before lunch. So I'm glad you're not going to judge me like that. But hopefully, the judge is making their decision by interpreting the law. So here's our eviction law. And why do we care about this part, these decisions made by judges? Because evictions, they have serious consequences. New York City found that eviction is the main cause of homelessness. Seattle study found that 25% of suicides in one county were evicted within 2 weeks before the suicide. Children that are evicted at developmental setbacks, they just lose a lot of stuff too. And education's disrupted. And so that's why it's great that, that's why legal aid, we focus on that. Because when someone goes to court, they can get better outcomes and minimize those things. But the vast majority of cases, there's just the landlord on one side, the landlord side. So that makes you think, there's a second role that law is supposed to do, and that's communicate those decisions made by the lawyers. So in other areas of law, where there are two lawyers, so the blank parts in the law get filled in by decisions and by precedent. So there's not much more about what default of payment of rent means in Ohio law. But what if the check was lost in the mail? Does that count? And that what if the check was lost in the mail? What the landlord requires me in Ohio, then the mail is the agent of the landlord, and in that case, if it had a lawyer, What if the landlord refuses full payment? And then what if the landlord refuses a partial payment? So these kind of decisions are decisions that are made over time. And the precedent, those earlier cases become what guides the judges in making those decisions. And otherwise, every time you'd have a judge interpreting this broad language, and it would basically become just that judge's decision about what they think the law is. And I mean, this is something that was recognized for a long time. I love this quote by Sir Toby. No man out of his own private reason ought to be wiser than the law, which is the perfection of reason. Sort of this idea from hundreds of years ago that the collective knowledge is going to be it's going to be wiser than any one person's knowledge. So no one could make laws that could, you can't make a set of rules that is going to match every possible scenario. So the common law was developed as something to fill in those gaps. And like, I think that on the Department of Justice, they say this too: the common law is the will of mankind, issuing from the life of the people, framed through mutual confidence, and sanctioned by the light of reason. So it's issuing from the life of people because it's actual cases that are being decided. And it's sanctioned by the light of reason because the judge is picking which side. And hopefully with reason. But I think it's like Kendrick Lamar is right that everyone lacks confidence. So that's what I think. So the benefits of precedent and following precedent are that it creates the uniformity, the fairness that the law is going to be applied the same way. Creates predictability, so people know what the law is going to be and they can conform their behavior. It's accountability for the courts. And I think it's basically the golden rule, it makes sure that people are treated the same. In Blackstone, when he defines what the rule of law is, that's part of it, the uniformity of the law and the openness of the law. I mean, it's not rule of law if you don't have those things. But in most eviction cases, there isn't the attorney. And there isn't anyone looking at what the precedent says. And in my experience, they're not even paying attention to the law that much. So you just get a lot of decisions for the landlord. So, and then we have another way that courts are held accountable, and that's through appeals. If a trial court makes a bad decision, then that case can be appealed, and the higher court might think about it a little bit more. But in evictions, often, I mean, maybe this is different in other places, but eviction appeals are basically impossible in evictions because the person's going to be set out before they can appeal, and then the case is moved. So there's really no accountability for courts about whether they're following the law. So what I think this creates is this acoustic separation, which is a term which I put that on speaker notes. I believe it's Dan Cohen, the 1982 journal article. Lawrence Lessig says it's his favorite law review article. But it's this idea that the acoustic separation is just a way to describe the difference between the law as it's written and the law as is applied. And I think the law is understood is another part too. So because there's no appeals, because there's so little time spent on this, the law is written can be best different how it actually works in court. So that communication part of law is about how the law actually works by building the body of law. Now there's another communication is how do people perceive they're being treated. And the idea of procedural fairness, procedural justice that Tom Teller and others have done a lot of work with. And they found that there's lots of real life impacts from just feeling you're being treated unfairly. I found that people feel like they're treated unfairly in family law cases are less likely to stay in contact with children, more likely to reoffend and less likely to vote. And Tom Powder's work, he's found that voice, people having voice and this ability to tell their own story is really the most important aspect of it, because having that voice leads to the perceptions that the judge is neutral and they have respect for the judge and trust the judge. So this acoustic separation in the courts really can, as one of my clients said, the only justice is straight justice. Then the other part of that, on the other side, is that landlords receive communication from the court too about how things work. And the rule of law is really the foundation that our markets and our society are built. And so if landlords realize that they can go into court and get an eviction whenever they want, when they realize that nobody's enforcing laws about health and safety standards, then that changes their whole cost benefit analysis. They don't have, I mean, they may make more money by just not making repairs, evicting that person, getting a $4,000 judgment, default judgment against them in the second cause. So, and then if that's the most economically beneficial thing to do, then that's what happens a lot. I mean, that's what economics tells us, right? That the most profitable thing is going to become the dominant method. And I think we're seeing that in landlord claim cases. So I think this also leads to another big difficulty of just, especially with legal weight, and what we're trying to do is, it's a lot easier for us to measure whether we win the case or not. It's a lot harder to measure, is the legal system working right? I mean, that you sort of just need a second legal system to tell the first legal system's working. So can technology help realize the rule of law? This is Quentin's slide. We're returning the favor since he borrowed one of mine. So there's this idea, the cathedral versus the bazaars, famous like open source essay. And the idea is that the cathedral model was this top-down, one big perfect solution, versus a bazaar where it's a lot of different people coming and that are creating it together. And I think this is what sort of what Cope was talking about. That law is really, instead, it works better when it's a lot of judges making decisions and then relying on other judges, and instead of one lawgiver saying, this is the way it is, because that lawgiver is always going to be imperfect. So, so I have faith that open source technology can help us. But one thing that I'm nervous about, both in our measuring and what I'm seeing with legal tech, is that people are focusing on that first role, and how do judges make decisions? Can we make an app that makes a decision? Can we have some algorithm that says if people are a bail risk? And I think one of the problems with that is that I don't think we have made any real progress in understanding how judges make decisions. We have jurisprudence, and I mean, we're all textualists now, according to Justice Kagan. Is that progress? I'm not going to get too much into that, but I'd love to at the happy hour talk about textualism. To me, I think I see jurisprudence as almost cyclical. there's a great book called Searching for American Jurisprudence about Roscoe Pound and Carl Lowell. And they were really, 100 years ago, talking about how law should be based on reality and facts and stuff like that. And I think that idea goes in and out. And now we have a Chief Justice who talks about sociological gobbledygook. But I think maybe the reaction to those kind of statements could bring back the ideas of sociological jurisprudence in the legal world. So, and there's been a lot of great books about these problems with algorithms and making decisions. Because if we're creating algorithms on the data we have, we don't need a fancy computer to do that. And the algorithm is real simple. Is the person represented? Then they have a chance of winning. If they're not, they don't. And if we can make a real fancy algorithm that looks at the history, but they're just going to come up with the same thing. So if instead we look at how can technology improve communication, the second aspect of the law, that is something that has changed and evolved dramatically over time. And so if we go back to, Blackstone, obviously he was using the printing press to print the commentaries on the law of England to sort of get his ideas out there. But then he also looked back to Caligula. So that's what I think this communication, back then he was recognizing that communication is something that evolves. For Caligula, so maybe in Caligula's time, the best way to disseminate the laws was to write your laws on a stone pillar. But you could do that in a bad way, hang it up real high so you couldn't see it. But, and then probably in Blackstone's time, that wouldn't ever be as effective as just printing a book. So, and then in the United States, where publishing became much more widespread than in Europe, and Paul Starr's Creation of Media is a really good book about this issue. Like a startup called West Publishing started publishing unofficial case decisions from reporters, and they created an index of topics that became keynotes, and that was way to share this information when we have a lot of other ways to do it. And this I thought was a great quote too. So in the 60s, the Ohio State Bar Association created OBAR, and when some of the people were working on it found this quote that they said, government contracts, you're not making any money on government contracts. Union Carbide, Piddling. OBAR, well, that could probably make some money. So and they're talking about computer storage of information. So they're recognizing that law has a bigger need for that and is more likely to pay for that than almost anything else. I think it almost shows that sometimes you hear that legal tech is lagging behind. I think what happens is that we were way early because open source, because law is this sort of open source thing. We needed to figure out how to get information and share information before everyone else could just start doing it with the World Wide Web. So, so Pacer started in 1988 and then moved to the web in 2001. And I feel like that's sort of, you can see that the 10 cents a page thing, that sounds to me like a fax machine in a drugstore prices in the 80s. I think it just feels like it's stuck. So, and now we moved, instead of just PDFs and files, PDFs with no metadata or any information, now we have a way to communicate where we do have metadata and objects and law can be human readable and machine readable. Just open up a lot more accessibility. So, and I think the way we need to do that is outlined really well in David Colarosa's and Erica Ricard's article, speaking the same language. Data standards and disruptive technologies. So now I'm going to move to talk a little bit more about standards, and just the disclaimer that I'm not an expert in this at all. I'm just trying to figure it out myself. So what I'm going to do is sort of give an overview of different standards. Anyone that wants to chime in, because I know there's people more knowledgeable than me, please do so. But then I'm going to talk about how I use my understanding of standards to create something that meets the needs of my organization. So, talking about standards, you see this XKCD comment, and the standards are like toothbrushes. You only need one, but everyone wants their own. Quotes a lot. And I think, to me, this goes back almost to the cathedral and bazaar things. Like, people are wanting that cathedral. They want the one standard, the authoritative thing. And I feel like standards is more of a practice than a goal for one thing. Like, we can all just do a little bit better using the same words as other people. And so I think like so many other questions I have, I can find the answer in the symbol documentation. And Jonathan shared just some best practice for sharing with others, which I think is, I think this is like the most important part. I'm going to talk about specific standards, but this is what it's really about. How do we share with others in the best way? And then for me, just thinking about standards, what's really helped me a lot is thinking about data structures. A lot of the standards I'm talking about are going to be sort of data structures or ways just to organize data. And all these quotes, I got these from a Hacker News comment, so I'm not 100% sure they're accurate, but I think they get across this idea that focusing on having smart data structures is the important part. And so I got the dumb code down, so I might as well focus on the smart data structures next. And just to go back to what Quinlan was talking about, and then I see that as the benefit of object-oriented programming. One thing with Docacon that really helped me a lot to understand this stuff, I feel like the generic object block in Docacon is like a beginner's way to understand objects. I don't have to know how to write a class. I don't have to know what init means, which for whatever reason, anything that contains a init confuses me. So the generic object sort of lets you do the type of things that you can do in a class really simply, and lets you start playing with the ideas. So I'm going to focus on how objects have a lot of properties. So that's what the generic object lets you do. It lets you, for this standard class like the A object, makes you can ask a question to set a property. All right. So Everett already talked about NSMI version 2, but I think that's the first most important standard for legal aid. And everyone in my organization, I don't think many people in my organization know what the NSMI is, but they all use it because LSC requires the NSMI to be used, at least the first 2 levels of it. But it's a big mess, and Margaret Higgins done some great work proposing some changes to it. And so how it works, it's hierarchical. I don't know if those words are right, but anyway, it's basically like a main topic like housing, and then a subset like eviction, and it just, it's more specific and specific. And so she's doing it to really improve natural language processing, to be able to identify what someone's legal issue is from just the natural language. And she's reviewed thousands of Reddit posts on our legal advice. And it's also, she's created a game, Learned Hands, which lets you help categorize stuff in a fun way. So this is what it looks like. And then another referral, I think, another standard I think is really important for legal services is the Human Services Data Specification that Open Referral has created. And Greg Bloom has been a pretty constant feature at LC technology conferences and promoting this with promoting it to legal aid a lot. So it's basically let's use the same vocabulary to describe how we're going to refer to other organizations that provide social services. And anyone who's worked with low-income people will know that legal issues are usually just one among many issues, and your referrals are all necessary. All right, and now it gets to stuff that I get confused about real quick, but this decision model notation is sort of like a business process standard about how we can describe repeatable decisions. And one thing I like about it a lot is it has these great online things you can test out. And I've started working on how we put the HUD handbook 4350.3, which is for a big chunk of subsidized housing. It's all the rules and policies that people have to follow. And so that's one of the benefits of thinking about this information in a standard way, is that we can pass it across jurisdictions. But something like the subsidized HUD handbook 4350.3 applies throughout the country. So
what was the previous product again? DMN. So it's that's like Camunda is like one of the standard organizations that people use a lot in like the airline industry, other business processing. It's like a process model in a huge area. That's DMN.
And that second slide was the output from that?
yeah, it's something that I built using it. And you can't really see one of, I think, the best features of it is it has these decision tables, which allows you to put in all these different variables and all these different range, the different possible answers. And then, so it's something when you have a complex formula that could have a couple different a couple of different answers, it lets you model it in a organized way. All right, now this is where I get real confused, this legal knowledge information format, but I think it is helpful because, so it's a legal core ontology. I feel like when I read about it, it's sort of like philosophy about the most abstract philosophical way we can talk about what the law is. And it lets you think about things like, what is a rule? It could be, in the deonic modality says a rule can be either an obligation, prohibition, or permission. So that might change how things work for you. I was just reading recently about this endurant or purgant entities. So the idea is that there are some parts of the ontology that are stable in space and change across time, and other ones that are stable in time when they change across space. So there's some things that you describe that are going to be like stable other things. And then there's going to be things like a legal issue changes over time. I mean, a legal issue, when someone getting a 3-day notice is different than someone getting a complaint filed against them. So we'll get into that a little bit more later. And I think a come on and touch those is an interesting way to, it's basically trying to make a standard for legal citations. But I've been trying to go to Italy for 2 weeks for school on that, so I'll get back to you. I can do that. So localization and internationalization aren't really standards, but they're just ideas about. So localization is being able to adapt what you have to any sort of language or culture. So why don't we think about it in law in the same way? That we can have tools that can be localized to specific jurisdictions' laws. And then internationalization is just designing the product so it allows the easy localization. And here's sort of a different use of the term standards, is this idea of quality standards. The Justice Index sort of ranks states on how well they provide access to justice by looking at state rules and policies. They interviewed the Chief Justice of Supreme Courts and the Chief Administrator and asked them what kind of forms do you have, what kind of accessibility do you have, and it ranks all the states on how, whether they're meeting those criteria. But for me, I think that it can be a little misleading because, like I was talking about, there can be protections written down, protections that the Supreme Court Chief Justice thinks are there, but when you're talking about every day in court, they're not there. And I think maybe just like another thing that helps out standards is having friends that are working on the same thing, and because you need to speak the same language with them. And I think that's helped. And going to things like hackathons where you meet people, like I did with Everett, who did the vast majority of the work on that eligibility engine, but for me, it just was like sort of opened me up to the way he was thinking about it, which it allows me to try to think about it the same way. Okay, so that's a bunch of ideas, but let's put them in practice. Makes perfect. So I have 3 things I want to do, three sort of jobs at work right now that I think these data structures can help. First, I need to do a better job of identifying the legal issue of everybody that calls us. We spend a lot of time doing this. I mean, we have a staff of intake specialists who ask minimum questions. We have an online app, and then a lawyer goes through each case and double checks whether the legal issue is properly identified. And this, of course, is really important for a number of reasons. I mean, it's how we know if we can refer a case. Here's an example of our protocols. So it sort of goes to this idea of eligibility. And these are, so it's like sort of a mix of where the person lives, what the legal issue is it an eviction, self-help eviction, and then a lot of times we use population sort of characteristics as someone's senior, or or they have a child in the household. This is only one part of 6 web pages of protocols that we have that we expect our intake specialists to review for every client. So it doesn't happen a lot, and that's why the lawyer reviews them often finds cases that should have been referred to. So we want to figure out ways to automate that process, make it a lot more accurate and less time consuming. And then the second thing I'm working on right now is we just, my organization, we represent 32 counties, 45 municipal courts. We have 6 different offices, and they were all merged together shortly before I started working there. And the idea was that we could have these practice groups that focus on, we have a housing practice group instead of every office having a housing attorney. But it still somehow turns out where we just for the first time had everyone that works on housing issues get together to have a meeting. And one thing that came out of that meeting was we wanted to do a better job of taking all the legal information that we have, all of our collective wisdom at our organization, and making it a lot more accessible. So how do we index that in a way that can be used? And so I'll get back to that. And then finally, my last goal was to do a better job of measuring what we do. And I want to do that by measuring whether the advice we give or what's in the textbook or in the law is what's happening in courts. Can we measure that acoustic separation and try to minimize acoustic separation? Try to sort of rank courts on whether they're following the law. Okay, so I'm going to go through this and sort of show you where I'm borrowing from. So for the first identifying the legal issue, it makes a lot of sense to start with the NSMI version 2 because that's what it is. It's a list of legal issues. So I'm going to, just for this example, say, okay, housing is the first issue. Then if you click on the little plus on the website, then you get to, it shows you subcategories. So I'm going to pick eviction from a home. And right now, that's as far as the NSMI goes, but just by seeing how she wrote the identification numbers, you can see that it's going to be a lot. The idea is there's going to be more layers. So I think eviction from a home could have 2 different kinds of evictions, an eviction in court or self-help eviction. So we're going to say this is for an eviction in court. So how do we get there? Like, how do you just find the right category? Well, I think this goes back to the idea of objects, in that each of these issues can have a series of properties. And so if housing has a property that says, what kind of housing problem do you have? And then there's a property for questionless for eviction from a home that says, my landlord is forcing me to leave. And you can make a Docacon symbol interview that walks someone through, that figures out how to ask those questions to identify the issue. If you can also just have a question and ask for each issue, like a yes or no question. Or you could do what Margaret's doing and try to use natural language processing to figure out the right thing. Or if you were scraping court data, like they do in Baltimore, as soon as someone says their name, they look at the court records and they can figure out if there's an eviction or not just from the court document. And then you have a lot more consistent and accurate information than you might get from a client. Okay, so you saw Everett's eligibility engine, and his idea was that to figure out whether someone's eligible really requires 3 things. The issue, she had the NSMI top level in his eligibility engine. The state, and he was talking about changing that to also include counties. And the eligibility requirements, which is the formula I showed you. And so I just, and after working with him, I'm pretty convinced that that's a great way to frame it. I just think that we also need to recognize that, you know, there's different kinds of jurisdiction. So there's the jurisdiction based on location, but I think type of housing is a jurisdiction. It's not, like right now, if you look at the NSMI version 1 that we're required to use, the way it's set up is that housing is the top level, and it's split up into public housing, subsidized housing, private housing. So it's describing just the type of housing as the issue. And then for each one of those things, it says, well, eviction could be an issue, conditions issues, landlord not making repairs is an issue. So it's repeating all that stuff for each type of housing. So it's sort of redundant and makes the NSMI much bigger than it needs to be. And in addition, what it does too is you can see it from the NSMI that private housing has a lot more categories than any subsidized housing, which should never be the case because all of those issues in private housing are also in subsidized housing. Because subsidized housing doesn't overturn state or local law, it only adds to it. But because of that, because we have the issues sort of siloed, then it doesn't always turn out that way. And it works the other way too. In the NSMI current version, tenant organizing is only an issue in subsidized housing, but tenants can organize a private building. All right, and then in the same way where I think we can break out the type of housing, and in different areas of the law, it might be a different kind of jurisdictional requirement. And these second or third parts of the issue may be different in different types of law too. But this stage, like I was saying earlier, is an important part of describing what the legal issue is. So my goal with identifying the legal issue too is, can we identify the legal issue specifically enough so we can provide relevant and helpful legal information about it? And so if we just know someone has an eviction and we don't know if they got a complaint yet, or if they have the notice to vacate, or maybe they were already evicted, we don't know what kind of information to give them because we need to know where they are in that process. And this is a perdurant entity that can also sort of be just using this field to describe an issue is almost like building a tickler system into our data structure. All right, and then in civil law, since this is civil law, like every issue really could have two issues based on who the party is. I mean, it's surprising how many calls we get from landlords, income eligible landlords that want to evict somebody. And then when you get into family law, then it's an even bigger issue. So I think an issue needs, so our legal issue starts with what the NSMI code is, and then but it's combined with these other fields that will actually give us enough specificity and know what the that will give us enough information to know what we need to provide the client. And so another field, I call it legal elements. So here I'll explain that a little bit better. That legal elements are what I call like parts of the element in a legal action. I mean, I use it the same way that we use it in law school, we use it while I was studying for the bar. But I think a big difference from legal issues, as I was talking about, was that they're not organized as subsets. It's not just that this is a housing case and an eviction case and a self-help eviction. Legal actions are more like a Venn diagram where the eviction is the green part of the middle. It's not that the grounds for the eviction is a subset. Or, I mean, if you look in the NSMI now, so it has procedural defense as a subset of an eviction case, or eviction for non-payment as a subset. But there's no reason why there's not a procedural defense in an eviction for non-payment, where both of those things can be true. So I see the dwellings being organized differently, and so we have to structure the data differently.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running a little bit on time. But it's been a particularly interesting presentation for me. I'm very proud of the fact that doc-assembled generic objects are mentioned on a slide in the same presentation with Blackstone and Caligula. It seems a little bit odd, I guess, to maybe some new people, but I really don't think it is, because I do think that technology has a lot of potential for good or for evil. Like I think about one of the applications of doc-assemble actually being online dispute resolution. You know, like in online tools, we have something called input validation, where you can't put in a date that's, you know, March 32nd, you know, but we don't have input validation on court orders. So, you know, a judge could sign an order and completely ignoring the law, and there's no, you know, validation on that other than, you know, bringing an appeal, which is not possible. But, you know, online dispute resolution holds some promise of being able to provide that type of accountability and predictability to the way decisions are made and documented that we don't currently have. And if we think about a possible future, we could have online dispute resolution where lawyers, instead of representing individual clients, are writing software to prepare the pleadings just right to fit within a computable system on the online dispute resolution platform that could generate orders where the judge makes a decision, but the judge can't ignore the law. Or if the judge does, then it needs to be documented in a certain way. And, you know, I think standards like NFID2 and also the efforts to just like try to create a legal XML or a legal, you know, doc-assemble object library could enable a lot of these systems to develop. So I think it's all kind of futuristic, but I do think it is realistic and something that's possible. And I love the fact that it's sort of a tech conference. And yet, you know, last night we were talking about what do we do to change the way courts behave so that they adhere to standards, and could we make poverty a protected class and things like that. You know, so even though we're developing tech at this very low level of, you know, Amazon Web Services and you know, data types, it all kind of does relate back to some of these bigger pictures. But anyway, I am cutting you off.
Okay.
But also, actually, we're digging into our break time a little bit. But does anybody have any comments?
So I was just wondering, in your research, did you come across Protégé, sort of an ontology software?
It's Stanford's ontology, and I think they help with schema.org a bit as well, like feeding into that. Like they use Protégé to help make their ontology.
So I was just wondering if you had any familiarity of how it looks like some of these would fit into that tool, and it's sort of an open source tool.
Yeah. I know that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know the whole realm. Yeah. And like, if I had time, I would add what Quentin had in his presentation on standards. I just wanted to say, I mean, I do think you're right about online dispute resolution, getting these data points, but I think we could be doing that with our tools that we're using now. It's like, okay, if someone's in an eviction answer, then we know if they used an eviction defense or not. And so we will know what court they tried to use that in and whether it's successful. And we can build accountability measurements through there. So I mean, that's what I think is our best step for what we were talking about, is how we can create a law that is user-friendly. And I think the only way to do that is through accountability. And we can do that by sort of making a local justice index where we're measuring these defenses and whether they're actually applied in court.
Any other comments? Or? All right, let's break for about 7 minutes and then come back at 2:45 for the next presentation. Thank you.